Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Kleinhans. Glad to see you this afternoon. Things will look a little different this afternoon, so I wanted to give you a heads up about that. We are experimenting with a different seating, and this is just our way of not only exploring the possibilities of Kleinhans, but also exploring how our orchestra hears each other and how they play together. So the normal string seating that you see is probably the most common in our country. First violins, second violins, viola, cello, bass. In other words, going around in a semicircle from high to low. But that's not the only way, and you may have seen other orchestras, visiting orchestras, or cities where you've visited and gone to an orchestra concert where the seating was different. There are a couple of other possibilities. We're trying one of them today. So our first violins are in their place. I've never seen the first violins anything other than here on my left. But instead of the second violins being next to them, we've put the second violins right across from them. So you're going to hear a kind of stereo effect, first violins, second violins. This is common, especially with music before 1850. Orchestras were very often set up that way, first violins and second violins. So you'll see some faces that you probably don't often see because they're tucked in the back of the first violins. You can't see them very clearly. So our seconds are doing a magnificent job. You'll be very impressed with them on the outside. Now, since they've taken the spot of the cellos have moved into their spot. Not very happily, but they are there. So you won't see the cellos as well because they're tucked behind the first violins. The violas are in their normal spot, so they haven't moved. But of course, wherever the cellos go, the basses have to go with them because so much of our repertoire, basses are playing along with cellos. So the basses are way in the back of the orchestra on this side. So it's a very different setup, and it will probably sound different to you. I'd be curious if some of you want to let me know how you felt about listening, but certainly the orchestras found it interesting because they've heard things very differently, and they really have heard parts of the orchestra that they normally don't hear. You know, orchestra musicians are so focused often on their parts that they don't hear the full scope of what's going around them, which is really the very practical reason for a conductor, that it's very hard for them to hear everything that's happening. So the second violins have heard things that they say they have never heard in Tchaikovsky Fifth before, and the woodwinds as well. Everyone is hearing differently, so you'll see that it does look a little bit different, and hopefully it'll be a fun experiment for you too to hear Kleinhans in a different way. Two fairly modern pieces on the first half, and I think that you will enjoy this discovery. We're starting out with a piece by Georg E Ligety. Now, hardly a name that's played often in concert halls, especially here. This piece has never been played. Ligety was a Hungarian composer, died very recently, died 2006. Now, you may think that you've never heard any of the music of Ligety, but if you went to see the movie 2001, The Space Odyssey, his music was used as the background score. And if you saw 1980, the film The Shining, a very frightening film, that also used the music of Ligety. And most recently, a film that was really wonderful but also frightening, Shutter Island. I don't know if you saw Shutter Island, the film Shutter Island. It was a wonderful film, used the music of Georg E Ligety. And both of those films were really scary, and the music, most of Ligety's music can be very, very cutting edge and very, very modern, let me just say in a simple way. This piece, though, is a little bit different, and it was a wonderful discovery for me and a discovery for the orchestra this week when none of them had known it. Ligety was born in Transylvania. Now, you might remember I talked about Transylvania about a month ago when we were doing Dances of Marasek, because I mentioned that Zoltan Kodály found the melodies for that beautiful piece in Transylvania. Transylvania was a part of Hungary, a very, very beautiful, scenic, physically beautiful part of Hungary. Ligety was born there. And he was also steeped in that kind of folk music, much of the folk music influenced by the Roma, the gypsy people. Now, he, of course, was a younger generation than Bartók and Kodály. Bartók and Kodály, the two Hungarians who actually went into the countryside and compiled all this folk music. But in an interesting way, Ligety had a direct connection with it because in his young life, he transcribed all of those folk songs from the wax cylinders that Bartók and Kodály used. They used this very kind of old-fashioned wax cylinder, and it was quite difficult to learn how to transcribe from it, but Ligety did that. That was his job. So he felt he was steeped in this tradition that had come for hundreds of years through his people, through, of course, Kodály and Bartók's efforts to save it, right down to him, where he was able to write it down. And he says, these are his words, "I learned how to transcribe folk songs. Many of these melodies stuck in my memory and led in 1951 to the Romanian concert." And that's what we were playing today, the Romanian concert. And it's actually a series of 4 of these dances, all strung together, slow, fast, slow, fast. Very beautiful, in a language that is unique. It's Hungarian language. You'll hear the beginning, the slow dance, is in always changing meters from 2 to 4 to 3 to back to 2, all different meters, but just kind of a sort of cadence that maybe sounds foreign to us because it's based upon the Hungarian language. As I've often said, composers write music in the language that they speak, in the language, their first language. So the cadence of their music sometimes is rooted in a language that we might not understand. So you'll hear how beautiful this is, but it unfolds in its own Hungarian style, this slow, very warm opening. Second movement, completely different. Second movement is a wild gypsy dance. And, you know, we have in our mind the kind of stereotypical image of the gypsies sitting around their campfire, and they're all great violinists, you know, and they're just tossing off these incredibly difficult figures, and a clarinetist too, another very popular instrument with the Roma people, playing, you know, fast flying just melodies, and they're kind of challenging each other back and forth, you know, in a way. So you'll hear that. Or in another way, maybe it's like one of these jazz songs, you know, where different people take solos and they sort of toss them back and forth. So you'll hear some wonderful solos. The most difficult and most dramatic is the concertmaster, because of course the gypsy fiddling was famous. So Michael has some really wild gypsy songs. That movement goes into the slow third movement. Again, very heartfelt, kind of mournful gypsy song, quite slow. And this one is interesting because Ligety uses a special technique that he was trying to imitate the sound of a horn, an alpenhorn, playing in the mountains, and hearing its echo coming back. You know, we have this image of someone playing a big alp horn, and they play into the air, and then it bounces off another alp, and they hear the echo of it. So he writes that in the music. So Daniel Kerdulevich, our associate principal horn, is playing the solo on the stage. He's the first horn. And then Jay Matthews had the role of the echo horn. And so the directions in the score say that Jay had to be placed somewhere far away in the hall so that it would sound like an echo. And we experimented all week. We had Jay up in this balcony on that side, that balcony. We had him in the back there, and we're trying all different things. The wonderful thing about Kleinhans, which was a little challenge for us, is that wherever you play, it sounds loud. It's very present. I mean, the stage is not only a wonderful acoustic, the whole hall has wonderful acoustics. So when Jay was playing up there, it was so loud we couldn't get it to be an echo. It was too loud. So finally we had an idea that Jay would actually play in the tunnel underneath the stage. So that's where he's playing. He's playing way underneath the stage. There's a tunnel, a passageway, and he's way down there playing. And you can hear him because there's still wonderful acoustics. In fact, when we were rehearsing, I was just calling down to Jay through the floor, and he could hear me. So Jay Matthews, you'll see him at the end of the piece, he is down there playing the echo horn. That third movement then again leads to a very, very wild gypsy finale. So this is true folk music. I mean, the very most appealing collection of dances from Transylvania region, from the Hungarian people. The piece was, Ligety had a very, very difficult life because he was a Hungarian Jew, and he lost both his father and his brother in concentration camps. And his music, when the Soviets took over Hungary, his music was banned. for various reasons. They felt it was too modern, or perhaps it was too Hungarian, which was not something they wanted to allow. So this piece was not heard for 20 years in Hungary. It was finally played in 1971 in Hungary. But it's a piece filled with love of his people, and I hope it's going to be a fun discovery for you, this wild dance. I'll skip the second piece because Christine is going to join us, and we go to the last piece on the program, Tchaikovsky Symphony No. 5, one of the most beloved of Tchaikovsky's 6 symphonies, an incredible masterpiece for the symphony orchestra. And each of these symphonies tells us something about Tchaikovsky's personality, because Tchaikovsky was very open with his listeners. He wanted to tell you what was in his heart, and he wanted you to respond in kind. And he leaves nothing unsaid. I mean, he's very, very emotional. He used the symphonies as a vehicle to express his own feelings. In his words, this is his explanation, he said, "Should not a symphony reveal those wordless urges that hide in the heart, asking fervently for expression?" And he expresses them. And I think all of us, Tchaikovsky is so popular and so moving because it resonates with us. I mean, we feel our own emotions are different than Tchaikovsky's, but he sets something in motion inside us so that we respond in a very emotional, individual way to all of this music. This symphony is one of the pieces that we owe a debt of gratitude to Madame Nadezhda von Meck. Madame von Meck was the very wealthy widow. Her husband had been a railroad magnate and left her a great deal of money when he died. And she one day heard some piano music of Tchaikovsky's being played, and she thought it was so wonderful that she had the idea that she would help this composer. And she offered him a stipend, a living stipend, so he wouldn't have to worry about teaching or working, or writing pieces that he didn't really want to write at that time. It enabled him to simply write the music that was right for him. And she made this offer to him, and you can imagine a poor composer what this kind of thing meant to him. Her only stipulation was that they never meet, and they never met, although they had a very intimate and very voluminous correspondence between the two of them, in which he told her many, many things he never told anyone else. And she was always incredibly supportive of him through his very tumultuous life, a very difficult life. But because of her support, he was able to write this symphony. 10 years had elapsed. He'd written his 4th symphony, which is another masterpiece, 10 years earlier, and then was devoting himself to opera. He was writing opera quite a bit, but he also was touring. He was the first Russian that actually toured internationally. And at that time, Russians were considered very exotic and kind of savage almost. And it was a big thrill for Europeans to meet Tchaikovsky. He came to the U.S. too, and it was very thrilling when he came to the U.S. He actually gave the very first concert. He conducted the very first concert on an opening night of Carnegie Hall. And that was an enormous coup to have Tchaikovsky there. So he traveled a great deal, which was very difficult for him. He said it was thrilling, but it was exhausting. So finally, after months and months and months of traveling, he came back to Russia, and he settled down in a little country house, and he began to write this piece. And this piece actually is one of the few pieces of his that has a meaning, has a theme. And we know that from a little scrap of paper that was found in his effects describing what this piece meant. So these are his words again. He said, let's see. Complete resignation before fate, before the inscrutable predestination of providence. Murmurs, doubts, reproaches against XXX. That's all he said about this. When Tchaikovsky wrote XXX, it was his secret. The secret that tormented him all his life, his homosexuality, that he never shared with anyone, and he was very unhappy because he longed for a family, he longed for a life that he wanted and could never have. So in his mind, fate loomed very large because he felt that fate had destined him for this life of solitude and unhappiness and separation, and he suffered a great deal. But fate for him had a great, great presence, and this is his Fate Symphony. the first thing that you hear, the very, very first thing that you hear is the Fate theme, played by the clarinets and bassoons and the low strings. And he chooses that register. It's very low register. It's very gloomy. It's very intense, brooding. It establishes a little bit of feeling of resignation, but also kind of despair right from the beginning of the first movement. And he uses that theme throughout the entire symphony. It appears in every movement, making the piece very cohesive and very powerful. And we'll hear that in a moment. The second movement is a great love song, starting out with one of the truly magnificent solos for French horn played by Jacek, one of very, very famous French horn solos. It shows Tchaikovsky as truly the most magnificent writer of melodies, melodies that were often borrowed in the 40s and 50s and set to words and became popular songs. Well, this is one of them. You'll recognize this horn solo. And in the score, Tchaikovsky actually wrote under the horn solo in Russian, "Oh, my love, how I love you, if only you would love me in return." We don't know who that was to, but it is a passionate love song. And right towards the end, in the middle of all this beauty, the Fate motto interrupts the love song, as if to say, you may be happy now, but the wheel of fate will turn. Third movement, a beautiful waltz. It will remind you of the Tchaikovsky who wrote wonderful ballets. This is ballet music. It's a beautiful, tender moment, very, very beautiful. And at the end, we hear again the whisper of the Fate motto. The finale, the Fate motto is right there at the beginning, but transformed, as you'll hear, and the piece ends in a major key. And it changes completely the tenor of how we perceive this. It ends with hope and a kind of feeling of the joy of life, no matter what. Tchaikovsky was hopeful. So we have these four statements of the theme. I wanted you to hear and see if you can notice how alike they are, but of course Tchaikovsky does vary them. This is the very beginning of the first movement, so you hear the important Fate theme. It's a beautiful color that he chooses really for this with the clarinets and bassoon. It's really just a stroke of genius. Now we move to the second movement, as I mentioned, in the middle of this wonderful music about love and music that's so warm and filled with passion. It's brutally interrupted by the Fate theme. This is the second movement. Moving on to something softer. The third movement, this wonderful waltz. It's, of course, now the Fate motive is not in 4, which is how it started. It's now in 3, because the waltz has to be in 3. See if you recognize it. Here's the third movement. Here it is. And then finally, the finale, where the Fate theme, the brooding, dark, ominous, despairing theme of the beginning now becomes a great theme of hope in major. So here's the last movement. It's one of the most stirring finales, and some of you have heard it here before, you've heard it other places. It's really a truly great symphony. In between, we have a 20th century, 1999, this piece was written for flute by Lowell Liebermann, and we are very, very proud that we have our own principal flute, Christine Bailey Davis, to play this. So I asked Christine if she'd come out for a few moments and share with us some of her background and also her feelings about this piece. So we'll see if Christine is here. Here she comes. We welcome Christine. Christine, good to see you again after your triumph last night. It was fantastic. We had a chance to play it. I mean, we've been rehearsing it all week and last night, and you get to hear this beautiful piece today. And I mentioned how proud we were that our principal is playing this piece. And I'm also proud because Christine is one of a small number of people, really just a handful of people in the Buffalo Philharmonic who are from this region. Most of our musicians come from all over the country, all over the world, but Christine is a Western New York native. So tell us a little bit about your background first.
I went to Frontier High School in Hamburg. I graduated in 1992. I went to the Cleveland Institute of Music after that for 3 years, and then I won the job with the BPO in June of 1995.
So how old were you when you won the job? You were
21.
21. So we haven't checked this out, but I feel certain that Christine was the youngest principal player maybe in the history of the Buffalo Philharmonic. So that's a wonderful, wonderful, amazing thing for us to have her. Now, Christine has played, well, first of all, you hear her in solos all the time, all the big solos in the repertoire for flute. You hear Christine playing, but she's also played Mozart. She's played lots of different concertos. But when we talked about what should we do on this special weekend, I don't think you thought about it too long. You really wanted to do this piece. When did you discover this piece? Do you even remember?
I actually don't remember. I bought a CD of it. I don't even remember the occasion. I think I just saw it and bought it. Yeah. And I loved it from the first time I heard it.
Yeah. It's truly a special piece. It was written for James Galway, so you probably heard that CD, right?
Yes, that's the one that I own.
And Lowell seemed to be able to just capture the sort of romantic, lyrical essence of the flute in addition to the extreme virtuosity of the instrument. It's very difficult. How would you compare it to some of the other pieces you've played in terms of difficulty?
It's probably one of the hardest pieces I've ever played, ever.
Yeah, you'll hear this. I mean, you'll hear the amazing, just constant flurry of notes going at a very fast tempo, but also the ability to float a melody over the orchestra. Very, very difficult. And Lowell, I think, must have loved Prokofiev. Don't you agree that this...
I think so. I think so. I got interviewed on WNED last week, and Peter Hall asked me, does Lowell Liebermann play the flute? And I said to him, I would be surprised if he didn't. I don't actually know, but I would be surprised if he didn't because of how well written for the flute that the piece is. And then I went and read his bio, and it says nothing in there about him playing the flute. It only says that he played the piano. Yeah. So I really am shocked at how well he wrote for the flute.
Yeah, I am too.
There are times when I play something that I think, I bet that person doesn't play the flute. I bet they don't really understand what the flute can or can't do. Right. But that's not the case with this piece at all.
No, and what Christine's saying is right. It's even more amazing because Lowell doesn't play the flute. I asked him once, and I think I asked him after we did it the first time. He said, no, but somehow he has an affinity for the flute because I think he's written a piccolo concerto also that's played quite often, and he obviously loves
something else for flute and harp, I think.
Yeah. He loves the flute, and he just is able to capture the true beauty of this instrument in the very special way. The beginning to me strikes me as a kind of Romeo and Juliet, Prokofiev, this kind of wonderful atmosphere that's extraordinary. I mean, it's really kind of makes your little hair stand up on end. It's a beautiful, beautiful beginning. The second movement, fantastic playing, fantastic interplay between the flute and the orchestra. And then the third movement is almost like a perpetual motion almost. When you start playing, I mean, it's thousands and thousands.
It's a 5-minute marathon.
A marathon, really, really, and thousands of notes flying by. So But it's amazing, and I know the whole orchestra's proud of Christine standing up here in the front. Is it, how do you prepare for this? Because of course you're preparing for music orchestra every week and difficult things to play, but stepping to the front is a different thing completely. How did you get ready for this?
I started practicing about a year ago when we decided to do this. At first, I would just practice whenever I had a few minutes at the end of a practice session. I got it out and started practicing. And I did that, for the whole spring. I let it go for the summer. I don't practice during the summer. I have 3 little children. I don't practice during the summer when I don't have to. I let it go for the summer, and then I started to hit it really hard in the fall. Yeah. And basically what I did was, I was playing it as much as I could. I would go through, I don't have a ton of time to practice every day.
Well, tell them how old your children are.
My children are almost 18 months. I have 3 girls, almost 18 months, 4, and 5. And it makes it hard. So I don't have a ton of time, so I really have to get organized. I've actually found it really good for my organization because I really don't have time to fool around. I got to get right to it.
You can't waste any time.
I got to get right to it. So I alternated between, some days I would say, okay, I need to work on this section, this section, this section, and I would do that. Other days, I would play through the whole thing. I actually did a lot of playing with the CD. Yeah. Which is kind of hard to do because you can't play in tune with a CD. It's kind of distracting, but at least it gives you the sound of the accompaniment, and it forces you to go through without stopping, which I think is important. So that was what I did. It was just kind of alternating between, all those different things.
Well, and that's hours and hours and hours of practicing, and it will seem to you completely effortless. But that's the sign of a great musician. So, Christine, we're very proud of you, and it was a great delight, and I know you are going to enjoy. Hopefully you'll say that the late 20th century, this is truly one of the great pieces that we have.
It really is. There are not a lot of pieces that sound like this. Yeah. Just like the orchestral texture that he writes is not something that you really hear, and it's beautiful. Yeah. It's beautiful. And the other thing too is that it's not a big orchestra that it's written for. But you'll be surprised at all the different sounds you hear.
The colors that he gets.
And the different colors, and it's not a big group. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, we both agree, it's an extraordinary piece, and we hope that you will love this discovery of hearing it. So thank you, Christine, and thank you for being here this afternoon.